She carried a covered dish up a church basement staircase in 1961, her name in masking tape on the bottom, not knowing it would find its way home to her 3 times before Sunday ended. This is not a video about poor families stretching a dollar. This is about the casserole as a social ritual, the dish you carried to a new neighbor, a grieving family, or a bridge club luncheon. And one of these 25 dishes has a name so specific it tells you exactly what occasion it was built for before I even explain it. One thing before we go on, and I will not mention it again. Everything I have gathered about keeping a house the old way is written down plain in Clara's 2 little books. The first link below this video will take you to it. If you would like it, it is there. That is all. That dish is funeral potatoes, a cheesy hash brown casserole topped with cornflakes or crushed potato chips, named directly for the occasion it served rather than any ingredient inside it. Very few dishes in American home cooking are named after the exact moment they were built to show up at. The tradition runs especially deep in Utah, tied closely to Relief Society women in Latter-day Saint congregations who have long organized meal trains for bereaved families, new mothers, and the sick. Funeral potatoes get requested constantly for exactly this purpose, because a large pan feeds a crowd, reheats well, and travels easily in a covered dish. That entire ritual of carrying a dish depended on a piece of kitchen hardware that has almost completely vanished today, the casserole dish with its own carrying lid or a wire caddy, often marked with the owner's name on masking tape stuck to the bottom so it could find its way home. Now for the dish everyone assumes is an old family heirloom. Green bean casserole was not passed down from anyone's grandmother at all. It was invented in 1955 by a home economist named Dorcas Reilly, working inside the Campbell Soup Company test kitchen in Camden, New Jersey. Reilly built it from ingredients nearly every American pantry already had: canned green beans, Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and French's fried onions, specifically to sell more cans of soup. She later recalled being genuinely surprised the recipe outlasted the hundreds of others her test kitchen produced that same year. Her original recipe card is now held permanently in the National Inventors Hall of Fame, donated by Campbell in 2002, an actual piece of engineered corporate marketing sitting in a museum case as though it were a patent for the light bulb. Head north to Minnesota and the Dakotas, and you find a word that gets misused constantly outside that region. Hotdish is not just a nickname for casserole in general. It refers to a specific structure, a starch, a protein, a canned cream soup as the binder, and a vegetable baked together in one dish, every single time. That precise structure is tied closely to Minnesota Lutheran and Catholic parish culture specifically, not the broader Midwest. Church basement cookbooks from these congregations, often spiral-bound and sold as fundraisers, are packed with hot dish recipes submitted proudly under a woman's own name. You would genuinely find recipes credited as Mrs. Arnold Pearson's hot dish, printed exactly like that, because a woman's specific version of a standard dish was a quiet point of identity within her congregation, a small signature stamped onto an otherwise humble casserole. Tater Tot Hotdish, one of the most beloved versions, only became possible because of an invention from 1953. Nephi Grigg and Golden Grigg at the Ore-Ida Company in Oregon invented the tater tot as a clever way to use leftover potato scraps from making frozen French fries. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Tater Tot Hotdish had become a genuine fixture of Midwest potlucks and school hot lunch programs, a dish literally invented from scrap potatoes that ended up feeding entire school cafeterias a generation later. Some casseroles on this list were built specifically to impress guests, not to feed a family cheaply. Chicken divan traces back to the Divan Parisian restaurant inside New York's Chatham Hotel in the 1930s and 40s, where a chef combined chicken and broccoli in a rich sherry cream sauce. Did your family have a go-to company dish for when guests came over? I would love to hear about it in the comments. By the 1960s and 70s, home economists had adapted it into a casserole using canned cream of chicken soup, giving church potlucks a dish that felt elegant. That desire to seem a little more sophisticated shows up again and again across this list. King Ranch Chicken Casserole borrows its name from the actual 825,000-acre King Ranch in South Texas, even though there is no solid documentation the dish was ever created there at all. Culinary historians treat the ranch name as borrowed purely for prestige, a way to make a casserole built from canned soup and tortillas feel grander than it actually was, the same aspirational branding trick that shows up in dish after dish on this list. King Ranch chicken spread through Texas church and junior league cookbooks, starting in the 1950s and 60s, riding alongside its close cousin, chicken spaghetti, another dish built around Rotel brand, diced tomatoes and green chilies, first produced in Texas back in the 1940s. Chicken tetrazzini carries perhaps the grandest name of all, honoring Luisa Tetrazzini, an Italian opera soprano enormously popular in San Francisco in the early 1900s. A hotel chef, most often credited to the Palace Hotel, built the original dish from spaghetti, chicken, mushrooms, and a sherry cream sauce in her honor. It became a genuinely popular way to use up Thanksgiving turkey leftovers and a staple of 1950s and 60s dinner party entertaining, an opera singer's namesake dish repurposed as a practical answer to a refrigerator full of extra turkey. Down in Louisiana, one single cookbook produced one of the most requested recipes in American community cooking history. River Road Recipes, published in 1959 by the Junior League of Baton Rouge, became one of the best-selling community cookbooks ever printed. The single most requested recipe inside that cookbook is Spinach Madeleine, built from spinach, a jalapeno cheese roll, and evaporated milk, a dish that spread from town to town largely because Junior League women across the South passed these cookbooks between their own social and civic circles. That same civic club fundraising model built casserole traditions all over the country. Junior leagues, women's guilds, altar societies, and PTA groups all self-published these spiral-bound cookbooks as fundraisers for civic projects, quietly becoming the primary way regional casserole recipes traveled at all. A gelatin dish belongs on this list too, and it might be the strangest one for modern viewers to understand. Savory Jell-O salad molds, built with lime Jell-O, cottage cheese, and mayonnaise, were considered genuinely sophisticated and modern in the 1950s, not the punchline they have become today. Jell-O itself dates back to 1897, introduced by Pearl Waite in Leroy, New York, but savory molds specifically peaked in the 1950s and 60s, promoted heavily through Jell-O's own recipe booklets and through women's club luncheon culture appearing constantly at bridge club gatherings. These molds fell out of favor by the late 1970s and 80s as fresher and more gourmet cooking, influenced by figures like Julia Child, pushed back hard against an entire generation of canned soup and gelatin-based entertaining. Travel to the Southwest, and you find a dish with two entirely separate, well-documented origin stories that food historians still argue over. Frito pie is claimed by both Texas and New Mexico, and this brief presents both traditions honestly rather than picking a winner. One story credits Daisy Doolin, mother of Frito-Lay founder Elmer Doolin, with creating a version in Texas back in the 1930s and 40s. The separate New Mexico tradition centers on Santa Fe's 5 and dime lunch counter, serving Frito pie directly in the split bag from the 1960s onward. Even after that original Santa Fe Woolworths eventually closed in the 1990s, a shop on the exact same site kept the tradition alive, meaning generations of visitors have made a genuine pilgrimage to that one specific spot rather than simply cooking the dish at home. Back up in the Midwest, another beloved noodle dish depended entirely on one company's product. La Choy, founded in Detroit in 1922, was the dominant brand of canned chow mein noodles for most of the 20th century, the defining ingredient in chow mein noodle hot dish. That dish, ground beef or chicken, celery, cream of chicken soup, and canned chow mein noodles baked crisp on top, is a genuinely odd fusion born entirely from one Detroit company's marketing reach stretching across the entire Midwest for decades. Some casseroles on this list existed purely for the holiday calendar. Overnight egg and sausage breakfast casseroles became standard for church brunches and Christmas morning family gatherings in the 1970s and 80s, prized specifically because they could be assembled the night before and simply baked in the morning. That single practical detail, no morning prep required, made this dish a genuine gift to any host trying to feed a full house of overnight guests without losing an hour of sleep on a holiday morning she would rather spend with family instead of standing at a stove. Ham and scalloped potato casserole took over a similar seasonal role for Easter. Layers of thinly sliced potato and ham baked in a creamy sauce, a dish that has survived almost exclusively as a single holiday exception rather than an everyday meal for most families today. Sweet potato casserole with a marshmallow topping followed the same pattern, narrowing down almost entirely to a single Thanksgiving appearance each year, meaning younger generations often only encounter several of these dishes once every 12 months and rarely learn to make them themselves. A Southern favorite followed its own quiet path into obscurity. Squash casserole, built from yellow squash and crushed Ritz crackers, once appeared at nearly every Southern potluck and church supper, a humble garden vegetable dressed up just enough to earn a spot on the fellowship hall table. Cabbage roll casserole, sometimes called lazy cabbage rolls, solved a genuine kitchen labor problem, taking all the ingredients of a traditional stuffed cabbage roll, ground meat, rice, tomato sauce, and simply layering them unstuffed in a baking dish instead of rolling each individual leaf by hand. Reuben casserole took a beloved deli sandwich, corned beef, sauerkraut, Swiss cheese, and Russian dressing, and turned it into a card party and cocktail hour dish through the 1960s and 70s, proof that casserole culture could absorb even a sandwich into its format. Scalloped oysters brought a genuinely coastal ingredient inland to plenty of holiday tables, oysters layered with buttered cracker crumbs and cream, a dish that signaled a slightly more special occasion than the everyday hot dish sitting right beside it on the same buffet table. And for the simplest social occasion of all, welcoming a brand new family to the neighborhood, there was company chicken casserole, built from chicken, sour cream, butter, and crushed Ritz crackers, the specific dish so many women reached for precisely because it traveled well and never failed to please a stranger. Every one of these 25 dishes, from funeral potatoes to a welcome wagon casserole, shares the exact same quiet function underneath the recipe itself. Food as a social signal, an offering, a way of saying "I see you" without a single spoken word required to explain why you showed up at the door. It is worth clearing up a misconception that follows this whole category of food everywhere. Many assume every one of these casseroles was cheap survival cooking. In reality, dishes like chicken divan, king ranch chicken, spinach Madeleine, and chicken tetrazzini were specifically company food, built to look impressive for guests. That distinction mattered enormously to the woman actually cooking. Reaching for chicken tetrazzini instead of a plain hamburger hot dish was, in its own quiet way, a decision about how much effort and sophistication a particular guest or occasion deserved that evening. Several of these dishes exist almost entirely because of a single company's marketing push rather than any organic home tradition at all. Campbell Soup, French's Onions, or Ida Tots and La Choy noodles each published their own recipe pamphlets specifically designed to be clipped, saved, and eventually treated as a family recipe. That is precisely why so many of these dishes feel like they came from a specific grandmother, when in truth, they came from a corporate test kitchen and a well-designed recipe card, a genuinely successful piece of mid-century marketing hiding inside every single one of our family memories. All of this depended on an entire infrastructure of gathering that has quietly shrunk over the past several decades. Church and civic club membership has declined significantly across the country, directly reducing the number of potlucks, fellowship hall suppers, and bridge club luncheons where these dishes were traditionally served. Without those regular gatherings, several of these dishes now survive almost exclusively as single holiday exceptions rather than everyday potluck food, meaning fewer households actually host or attend the kind of casual gathering that used to pass a recipe from one kitchen to the next. There has been a modest online nostalgia wave in recent years, though. Vintage recipe blogs, retro cookbook scanning, and what some people jokingly call cookbook archaeology, bringing renewed attention to these community cookbooks from the 1950s through the 80s. Tuna noodle. Casserole deserves its own spot on this list. Egg noodles and canned tuna bound in cream of mushroom soup and topped with crushed potato chips, a dish that showed up at potlucks specifically because it was inexpensive to make in a large enough batch to actually share with an entire fellowship hall. Broccoli rice casserole followed a similar logic: rice, cheese, broccoli, and a canned cream soup binder, a dish flexible enough to be doubled or tripled easily for a crowd without a woman needing to do any real mental math at the grocery store the night before. Corn pudding, sometimes simply called corn casserole, brought a genuinely sweet note to the savory potluck table. Corn, eggs, and a touch of sugar baked into something halfway between a side dish and a dessert, a small point of variety on a table otherwise dominated by cream, soup, and cheese. Wild rice hot dish, a specifically Minnesota specialty, leaned on the state's own genuine wild rice harvest tradition, combining that rice with chicken or mushrooms and the standard cream soup binder, a hot dish that quietly advertised the cook's regional pride right alongside her hospitality. Hamburger hot dish, the plainest and arguably most beloved of the entire category, combined ground beef, a starch like macaroni or tots, cream soup, and whatever vegetable was on hand, the reliable everyday version sitting quietly beside its more elaborate company food cousins on the very same buffet table. Poppy seed chicken casserole rounded out the company food side of the list: shredded chicken, sour cream, and a buttery Ritz cracker topping flecked with poppy seeds, a dish specifically favored for bridal showers and new baby celebrations where a slightly fancier presentation felt appropriate. Notice the pattern running underneath every single one of these 25 dishes now that we have gone through them. Each one was matched, deliberately or not, to a specific social occasion: a funeral, a shower, a holiday morning, a new neighbor, a bridge club afternoon, never simply a random Tuesday dinner. That matching system was never written down anywhere as an actual rule. It lived entirely in the shared, unspoken knowledge of the women who cooked for these occasions. Exactly which dish to bring where, passed along the same way the recipes themselves were, mouth to mouth, kitchen to kitchen. Even the ingredients themselves tell a story about how quickly American home cooking changed in this era. Canned soup, canned tomatoes, frozen hash browns, canned noodles, every single one of these products only became widely available in the exact same post-war window that produced this entire wave of casseroles. That timing was not a coincidence at all. The rise of the home freezer, national canned soup marketing, and a booming suburban kitchen culture collided in the same narrow decade, and casseroles were the direct, edible result of that collision, landing on kitchen tables all across the country. It is worth remembering, too, just how much labor sat behind the appearance of effortlessness in each of these dishes. A casserole that looked simple and homey on a buffet table often still required real planning: a grocery trip, an hour of prep, and careful transport in a dish nobody wanted to accidentally break. Getting that dish safely from one kitchen to a church parking lot to a fellowship hall table without spilling a drop or cracking a lid was its own small feat of logistics, repeated by women across the entire country every single weekend for decades. Community cookbook culture itself began shrinking as church attendance and club membership declined in the decades that followed, meaning the very publishing mechanism that had spread these recipes town to town for generations gradually lost the audience it once had. That decline did not happen overnight. It stretched across decades, church by church, club by club, each one quietly losing a few members every year until the fellowship hall suppers that once filled entire calendars became occasional events instead of a weekly certainty. Even so, plenty of these dishes have found a strange second life online, vintage recipe accounts and retro cookbook scans drawing genuinely enthusiastic comments from people rediscovering a dish their own mother or grandmother used to make for exactly the occasions we just walked through. That renewed attention is mostly historical curiosity rather than a genuine return to regular home preparation. People are fascinated by these dishes as artifacts of a specific social world far more often than they are actually cooking them for dinner tonight. But that is exactly what makes this list worth preserving carefully. Each of these 25 dishes is a small, edible fossil of an entire social infrastructure. Church basements, bridge clubs, junior leagues, and Relief Society meal trains that shaped how an entire country cared for each other through food. Think about how many of these dishes you could identify on site before this video even started. The green fried onions, the crushed potato chips, the marshmallow topping, visual signatures so familiar that most of us can picture the exact dish without needing a single ingredient listed out loud. And yet almost nobody actually knows the specific story behind any single one of them. The Campbell Test Kitchen, the Opera Singer, the Utah Relief Society, the Junior League Fundraiser, all quietly forgotten underneath a dish that somehow still tastes exactly like a memory. That gap between taste and knowledge is exactly the gap this channel exists to close. One dish, one story, one forgotten kitchen ritual at a time. So the next generation inherits more than just a recipe card clipped from a magazine decades ago. It also helps to remember that not every household leaned equally on all 25 of these dishes. Regional identity mattered enormously. A Minnesota Lutheran table looked genuinely different from a Baton Rouge Junior League luncheon, even though both were, underneath it all, doing the exact same social work with a casserole dish. That regional variety is part of why this list spans Texas, Minnesota, Utah, Louisiana, and New Mexico all at once, because the casserole as a social ritual was never really one single national tradition. It was dozens of local traditions, all reaching for remarkably similar tools to solve the exact same human need. So when you picture green fried onions or funeral potatoes from now on, I hope you picture more than a recipe. I hope you picture Dorcas Reilly's test kitchen, a Relief Society meal train, a Junior League fundraiser, an entire quiet network of women who fed a country one covered dish at a time. What strikes me most about all 25 of these dishes is how much genuine social choreography sits quietly underneath a casserole dish. Who brought it? Why they brought it, what occasion it marked, all of that history baked right in alongside the cream of mushroom soup. If one of these 25 brought back a memory of a specific potluck, a specific neighbor, or a specific covered dish with your own family name written on the bottom in masking tape, stay close, because there are so many more of these forgotten kitchen rituals still waiting to be uncovered together.